That night, a poor waitress from the Bronx slums punched the most powerful mafia boss in New York right in the face in front of 300 elite guests. Not because she was insane, not because she had a death wish. It was the only way to save his life. But before you understand why she did it, you need to know what she had already lost just to be standing there. 12 hours earlier, Alara Morgan woke not to sunlight, but to the sound of her mother dying. It was 3 a.m. The Bronx apartment was pitch black. The electricity cut off 2 weeks ago because she couldn't afford the bill, but she didn't need light to recognize that sound, the wet, rattling cough that had haunted her nights for months. Except this time, it was worse. This time, it sounded like her mother was drowning. She threw off the thin blanket and ran barefoot across the cold, cracked floor. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms that smelled of mold and desperation, so it only took her 3 steps to reach her mother's mattress on the floor. What she saw made her heart stop. Grace Morgan was hunched over, one hand clutching her chest, the other pressed against her mouth. And in the pale moonlight seeping through the broken window, Alara saw it blood, dark and thick, seeping between her mother's fingers, staining the already dirty sheets. "Mom!" Alara dropped to her knees, grabbing her mother's shoulders. "Mom, look at me!" Grace tried to speak, but another cough ripped through her frail body, spraying more blood onto the cloth she pressed to her lips. Her eyes were wide with fear, not fear of dying, but fear of leaving her children behind. A movement in the corner caught Alara's eye. Lily, her 16-year-old sister, stood frozen in the doorway, hands trembling as they moved frantically through the air. Sign language. Lily had been deaf since birth, and in moments like this, her silence felt heavier than any scream. "What's happening? Is Mom dying? What do I do?" Her hands moved so fast that Alara could barely keep up. The terror in Lily's eyes was unbearable, the look of a child who couldn't hear her mother choking but could see the blood, could feel the panic vibrating through the thin walls. Before Alara could respond, another sound pierced the darkness. Wheezing, gasping, the unmistakable whistle of air struggling through constricted lungs. Tommy, her 10-year-old brother, appeared in the doorway behind Lily, clutching his chest, his small face turning pale as he fought for breath. Asthma attack. Triggered by the stress, by the fear, by the mold that crawled up their walls like a slow poison. "My inhaler," Tommy wheezed, each word a battle. "It's empty." Alara's world split in 2. Her mother was coughing blood on one side. Her brother was suffocating on the other. Her deaf sister stood between them, hands still signing desperately into the void, asking questions nobody could answer. She had 2 hands, 2 arms, 1 body, and 3 people who needed her to save them. For a moment, just a single, terrible moment, Alara couldn't move. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest like 1,000 stones. She was 27 years old, and she had been carrying this family since she was 19. 8 years of fighting, 8 years of sacrificing, 8 years of watching everything she loved slowly crumble while she desperately tried to hold the pieces together. But she couldn't break. Not now. Not ever. She forced herself to move. "Lily," she signed rapidly while speaking aloud for Tommy. "Prop Mom up. Keep her sitting. Don't let her lie down." Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face, and rushed to their mother's side. Alara sprinted to the bathroom, if you could call it that. A broken toilet, a sink that dripped brown water, and a cabinet that held nothing but empty medicine bottles she couldn't afford to refill. She found the spare inhaler in the back, the one she'd been saving for emergencies, because she couldn't afford another refill for 3 more weeks. It was nearly empty, maybe 2 puffs left. She ran back, pressed it to Tommy's lips, and pumped. 1 puff. His wheezing continued. 2nd puff. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, his breathing began to ease. She turned to her mother, who was still coughing but less violently now. Lily had propped her up against the wall, her small hands still trembling as she stroked their mother's hair. Grace looked up at Alara, and in her eyes was something worse than pain. Guilt. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered, her voice raw and broken. "I'm sorry I'm such a burden. Don't." Alara grabbed her mother's hand, squeezing hard. "Don't you dare apologize." She looked at Lily, then at Tommy, then back at her mother. 3 pairs of eyes stared at her, waiting, hoping, believing that somehow she would fix this, that somehow she always did. Alara forced a smile, the same smile she had worn for 8 years, the one that hid the cracks in her soul. "Everything will be okay," she said, her voice steady even as her heart shattered. It was a lie. She had told it so many times that it no longer felt like lying. But deep down, in the darkest corner of her heart, Alara knew the truth. Nothing was okay. Nothing had been okay for a very long time. And tonight, if she didn't find money, real money, they would all drown together. When the crisis passed and her family finally fell into an exhausted sleep, Ilara sat alone in the darkness of their kitchen, if you could call it a kitchen. The walls were black with mold, creeping up from the corners like a disease that had been left to fester for years. The landlord had promised to fix it. That was 3 years ago. Now the mold had spread so far that Ilara had stopped trying to scrub it away. It always came back, just like everything else that was slowly killing them. A cockroach skittered across the counter, and she didn't even flinch. She had stopped being disgusted by them long ago. They were roommates now, the roaches, the mice that scratched inside the walls at night, the rats she sometimes heard fighting in the garbage outside their window. The pipes groaned, and brown water dripped from the ceiling into a bucket she had placed there months ago. Drip, 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 a rhythm she had memorized, a countdown to the day when the whole building would collapse on top of them. Her stomach growled, and she pressed her hand against it, willing it to be silent. 2 days. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. The refrigerator hummed weakly in the corner, a miracle it still worked at all. But when she had opened it earlier, hoping to find something, anything, for Tommy and Lily, she had found only a carton of milk that had expired a week ago and half a loaf of bread spotted with green mold. She had cut the mold away, carefully, precisely, and given the remaining pieces to her siblings. They didn't need to know there was nothing left for her. Ilara pulled the pile of papers toward her, the stack that sat on their tiny table like a tumor, growing larger every month. Bills, notices, threats, each one a knife pressed against her throat. She didn't need to read them. She had memorized the numbers long ago. Hospital bills for her mother's cancer treatment, $89,000, overdue for 8 months. The hospital had stopped sending polite reminders. Now they sent lawyers. Her mother's specialized medication, the only thing keeping the cancer from spreading faster. $12,000 per month. They had missed the last 2 payments. The pharmacy had cut them off. Rent for this rotting apartment, $4,500 in total. 3 months behind. The landlord had come last week, pounding on the door, screaming that he would throw them onto the street if she didn't pay by the end of the month. The debt her stepfather had left behind when he abandoned them 7 years ago, gambling debts to people who didn't forgive and didn't forget. $38,000. And the worst one, the one that made her hands tremble every time she thought about it, the loan sharks. $15,000, borrowed in a moment of desperation 6 months ago, when her mother needed emergency surgery and the hospital demanded payment up front. $15,000 that had become $18,000, then $22,000, then more interest compounding like a cancer of its own. Total debt, $187,000, a number so large it felt like a death sentence. Ilara closed her eyes, and the memory came flooding back. 2 weeks ago, the night she had tried to forget but couldn't. She had come home late from a job interview, another rejection, another door slammed in her face and found them waiting in the hallway. 2 men, one tall and thin with a face like a skull, one short and thick with hands like meat cleavers. They hadn't said much. They didn't need to. The tall one had grabbed her by the hair and slammed her against the wall. The short one had punched her in the stomach, then the ribs, then the face. She had crumpled to the floor, tasting blood, seeing stars. 16 days, the tall one had said, crouching down to look into her swelling eyes. You have 16 days to get us $15,000. If you don't. He had looked toward the apartment door, and Ilara's blood had turned to ice. Your deaf sister. Pretty little thing. I'm sure she'd fetch a good price. They had left her there, bleeding on the floor, sobbing silently because she couldn't let Lily and Tommy hear. 16 days. Now it was 14. Ilara looked down at her hands. The bruises had faded, but the fear hadn't. It lived in her chest like a second heart, beating constantly, reminding her of the clock that was ticking down toward her sister's destruction. She could have escaped this. She knew that. 3 months ago, a man at the bar where she used to work had offered her $5,000 for one night. He had looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl, had described exactly what he wanted in a voice that dripped with entitlement. $5,000. Enough to buy another month of survival. All she had to do was sell herself. She had refused. Last month, another offer. This time from the restaurant manager who had been staring at her for weeks. He had cornered her in the storage room, pressed his body against hers, and whispered that he could make all her problems disappear if she just gave him what he wanted. She had kneed him in the groin and walked out. They had fired her the next day. Ilara looked at the pile of bills again, then at the mold-covered walls, then at the darkness beyond the window where the Bronx sprawled like a forgotten wasteland. She was 27 years old. She had given up her dream of becoming a doctor. She had sacrificed her youth, her health, her future, everything for this family. And still, it wasn't enough. It was never enough. But selling her body? Becoming something she would be ashamed for Lily to know about? No. She would rather starve. She would rather die. Some prices were too high, even when you had nothing left to lose. But as she sat there in the darkness, listening to the rats scratch and the water drip and her mother cough in the other room, Alara knew one thing with absolute certainty. She needed money. Tonight, or everything she had fought for would be destroyed. The phone rang at 6 in the morning. Alara had been sitting in the same spot for 3 hours, staring at the pile of bills, her mind spinning in circles that led nowhere. When the cracked screen of her old phone lit up, she almost didn't answer. Bill collectors called at all hours now, their voices dripping with threats and false sympathy. But the number was unknown, and unknown numbers sometimes meant work. She answered. "Is this Alara Morgan?" A woman's voice, sharp and professional. "Yes, I'm calling from the Obsidian Hotel. We need temporary servers for a charity gala tonight. One of our girls got sick. Someone recommended you. $500 for one night's work. Are you interested?" Alara's heart stopped. $500. $500 was Tommy's inhaler medication for 2 months. $500 was a week of her mother's pain pills. $500 was food in their refrigerator and another week before the landlord kicked them onto the street. "Yes," she said, before her brain could catch up with her mouth. "Yes, I'm interested." "Good. Be here by 4 this afternoon. Service entrance. Don't be late." The line went dead. Alara sat there, staring at the phone, her hands trembling. For the first time in weeks, something that felt almost like hope flickered in her chest. Then the hope turned cold. The Obsidian Hotel. She knew that name. Everyone in New York knew that name, or at least, everyone who lived in the shadows that the rich pretended didn't exist. The Obsidian was not just a hotel. It was a fortress, a palace built on secrets and blood. People whispered about it in the corners of bars and in the back alleys of the Bronx. They said it belonged to the Mafia, the real Mafia, not the movie version with dramatic speeches and codes of honor, but the kind that made people disappear without a trace. The kind that owned judges and cops and politicians. The kind that could erase your entire existence with a single phone call. They said that people who walked into the Obsidian uninvited never walked out again. Alara swallowed hard. But $500. A sound behind her made her turn. Her mother stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thin blanket, her face pale and gaunt in the gray morning light. She must have heard the conversation. "Don't go," Grace whispered, her voice weak but urgent. "Please, Alara, those places, they're not for people like us. The men there are dangerous. They take what they want and throw away the rest." Alara stood and walked to her mother, taking her frail hands in her own. "Mom, we need the money. Tommy's inhaler is empty. Your medication, I don't care about my medication." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I care about you. I can't lose you. If something happens to you, nothing will happen." Alara forced a smile, the same lie she had been telling for years, wearing it like armor. "It's just one night. I'll serve some drinks to rich people, keep my head down, and come home. That's all." Grace shook her head, but she was too weak to argue. The cancer had stolen her strength along with everything else. "Just one night," Alara repeated, more to herself than to her mother. "I'll bring something home, I promise." She didn't know, couldn't possibly know that she would keep that promise. But what she would bring home wouldn't be money. It would be something far more dangerous, something that would change her life forever. Alara arrived at the Obsidian Hotel at exactly 3:45 in the afternoon. She had washed her black and white uniform by hand the night before, scrubbing out stains that wouldn't fully disappear, and hung it to dry near the window where the cold air seeped through the cracks. It was wrinkled and faded, but it was clean. It was all she had. The service entrance was around the back, down a narrow alley that smelled of garbage and something else, something metallic that she didn't want to think about. A security guard with a face like carved stone checked her name against a list, then pointed toward a heavy steel door without saying a word. She descended. The basement of the Obsidian was nothing like she had imagined. She had expected darkness, dampness, the kind of forgotten space where rats made their homes. Instead, she found herself in a pristine white corridor, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the air cold and sterile like a hospital or a morgue. 25 other temporary workers stood in a large room at the end of the corridor. Their faces were tense, anxious, illuminated by the harsh lights that left no shadows to hide in. Some were young like her, others were older, worn down by years of serving people who never bothered to learn their names. None of them spoke. The silence was heavy, expectant, like the air before a storm. Then the door opened, and Helena Cross walked in. Alara knew immediately that this woman was dangerous, not in the way that men with guns were dangerous, but in the way that a blade hidden in silk was dangerous. Helena was perhaps 45. Her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of cold displeasure. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Alara's entire yearly income, and she carried a clipboard like a weapon. Her eyes swept across the room, and Alara felt herself shrink involuntarily. "Listen carefully," Helena said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You are temporary staff. That means you are replaceable. That means you are nothing. One mistake, one spilled drink, one wrong word, one moment of stupidity, and you are out. No payment, no second chance, no excuses." She paused, letting the words sink in like venom. "Tonight's event is a charity gala for the Salvatore Foundation. 300 of the most powerful people in New York will be attending. You will serve them. You will be invisible. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not make eye contact unless necessary. You are furniture. You are wallpaper. You do not exist." Helena's gaze moved across the room, assigning positions with quick, decisive words. Ballroom, bar, kitchen, coat check. Then her eyes landed on Alara. "You." Alara's heart jumped into her throat. "You're on VIP service tonight. You will serve the guest of honor exclusively. No one else. Just him." Alara nodded, not trusting her voice. "The guest of honor," Helena continued, and something shifted in her tone, something that might have been fear, carefully controlled, "is Dante Salvatore." The room went still, not quiet, still. As if every person had suddenly stopped breathing at the same moment, Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Dante Salvatore. Everyone knew that name. Everyone in New York. Everyone in the country. Perhaps everyone in the world who paid attention to the whispers of power that flowed beneath the surface of polite society. The most ruthless mafia boss on the East Coast. The man who had inherited an empire of blood at 24 and expanded it into something even his father couldn't have imagined. The man whose enemies disappeared without trials, without funerals, without even a body for their families to mourn. They said he had killed his first man at 16. They said he had once watched a traitor bleed out on the floor of this very hotel without blinking. They said his eyes were the color of a winter storm, and just as merciless. And tonight, Alara would be standing beside him, pouring his drinks, close enough to touch. But it wasn't fear that made her hands tremble, as Helena dismissed them to prepare. It was irony, cruel, bitter irony, because she knew Dante Salvatore's name for another reason too. The Salvatore Foundation. The charity gala tonight was for their scholarship program, a program that helped poor students afford college, that gave opportunities to children who had none. 3 years ago, when Alara was still dreaming of medical school, still believing that hard work could lift her out of the darkness, she had applied for one of those scholarships. She had spent weeks on the application, pouring her heart into essays about her mother's illness, her siblings' struggles, her desperate hope for a better future. The application was still hidden under her mattress at home, tucked away with other relics of a life that could have been. She had never submitted it. The week before the deadline, her mother had collapsed, and Alara had dropped out of school to take care of her family. The scholarship that could have changed her life, funded by the foundation of the man she would now serve drinks to. Fate wasn't just cruel, Alara thought as she followed the other servers toward the elevator. Fate was laughing at her. The elevator doors opened, and Alara stepped into another world. She had seen wealth before, glimpses of it through restaurant windows, flashes of it in the jewelry that customers wore while they complained about their overcooked steaks. But this was different. This wasn't wealth. This was a kingdom. The grand ballroom of the Obsidian Hotel stretched before her like a palace from a fairy tale, the kind of fairy tale that was never written for girls like her. The floor was black marble, polished so perfectly that she could see her own reflection staring back at her. White veins ran through the stone like frozen rivers of silver, catching the light and scattering it in every direction. She was afraid to step on it, afraid that her worn shoes would leave marks that someone would notice, that someone would use as an excuse to throw her out. Above her, massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, not one, not two, but dozens of them, each one dripping with thousands of crystals that caught the light like imprisoned stars. They cast a warm, golden glow across the room, turning everything soft and dreamlike. Each chandelier was probably worth more than the crumbling apartment where her family was slowly dying. Alara swallowed hard, forcing her face to remain still. She was invisible, she reminded herself. And invisible people were not allowed to feel. Staff members moved around her with the precision of a well-rehearsed orchestra. They spread pristine white silk tablecloths across round tables, silk so fine that Alara knew just by looking at it that touching it would feel like touching water. Silver plates were arranged in perfect rows. Gold-plated cutlery gleamed beneath the chandeliers. Crystal glasses stood at attention, so delicate they looked like they might shatter if someone breathed too hard. She walked past the bar area and saw the bottles lined up on glass shelves. Names she couldn't pronounce: French, Italian, words that belonged to a language spoken only by the rich, but she didn't need to read the labels to understand their value. One bottle, just one of those bottles, would pay for 3 months of her mother's cancer medication. 3 months. 3 months of her mother living longer, hoping longer, watching Tommy grow just a little more. All of it locked inside a glass container that someone here tonight would empty in minutes and never think about again. But what made Alara's chest tighten wasn't the wine or the crystal or the silk. It was the flowers. Massive floral arrangements stood throughout the ballroom, each one reaching up to her chest. Pure white lilies, pale purple orchids, deep red roses, the color of fresh blood. They overflowed from golden vases, their sweet fragrance filling the air with a perfume she had never known existed. She stopped in front of one arrangement, staring at the perfect petals, not a single crease, not a single flaw, and her mind began calculating on its own. One rose. Just one rose here was probably worth a week of her mother's pain medication. This entire arrangement could pay for a full round of chemotherapy, and there were dozens of them. Hundreds of flowers that would wilt after tonight, that would be thrown away like garbage tomorrow morning, while her mother coughed blood onto sheets Alara couldn't afford to replace. A surge of anger rose in her chest, hot and bitter. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask why the world was this unfair, why some people could throw money at decorative flowers while others had to choose between bread and medicine. She wanted to grab one of those crystal glasses and shatter it against the marble floor, just to hear something break that wasn't her own heart. But she swallowed the rage like bitter medicine, because she knew anger wouldn't help. Anger wouldn't pay the debts. Anger wouldn't cure cancer. Anger would only cost her this job. And losing this job meant losing her family's last fragile lifeline. So Alara straightened her back, fixed her face into an expression of empty calm, and kept walking. She was furniture tonight. She was wallpaper. She didn't exist, and neither did her pain. Alara was checking the placement of glasses on the VIP table when a voice sliced through the air like a blade. Sharp, cold, dripping with contempt. She turned her head and saw a woman enter the ballroom. No, not enter, appear, as if the entire room had been created solely as a backdrop for her presence. Isabella Ashford wore a gown the color of blood, the fabric clinging to her body like a second skin before cascading to the floor in waves of crimson silk. Diamonds hung from her neck and dripped from her wrists, each stone catching the chandelier light and throwing it back in blinding sparks. Her hair was golden blonde, styled into flawless waves that spilled over bare shoulders like liquid sunshine. Her face was perfect. Porcelain skin, high cheekbones, full red lips curved into a smile that Alara recognized immediately as fake. She was beautiful, breathtakingly, impossibly beautiful, but it was the cold beauty of a marble statue, perfect and lifeless. Trailing behind Isabella was a photographer clutching a professional camera and 2 makeup artists who hovered around her like obedient puppies, ready to powder her nose or adjust her hair at a moment's notice. Isabella stopped in the center of the ballroom, swept her ice blue gaze around the room, and frowned. Irritation etched across her perfect features, as if she had just caught an unpleasant smell. "This lighting won't do," she declared, her voice echoing through the space. "It makes my skin look washed out. Fix it." A technician rushed over to adjust the spotlights while Isabella stood with her arms crossed, fingers tapping impatiently against her elbow. She didn't say thank you when he finished. She didn't even look at him. She walked toward the stage where the speeches would take place later, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. "I'll stand here when I introduce Dante," Isabella told the photographer, positioning herself beneath the lights. 3/4 angle. Remember, not straight on makes my nose look bigger. And when I hug him, shoot from the left. The left is my best side. She tested several poses, tilting her chin up, then down, checking the shadows on her face as if this were a magazine cover shoot rather than a charity gala. Alara watched from her corner, saying nothing. She noticed that Isabella hadn't glanced once at the banners about underprivileged children hanging on the walls, hadn't spared a single second for the scholarship flyers laid out on the tables. To this woman, tonight wasn't about charity. Tonight was the Isabella Ashford show. Everything else was merely a prop. Then it happened. A young waitress, barely 20, with nervous hands and a face still soft with youth, accidentally walked past at the exact moment Isabella was posing. Her shadow crossed the camera's frame for just a second. Isabella spun around. Her blue eyes turned to ice. Her perfect lips twisted into something ugly. "Are you blind?" she hissed, her voice venomous. "Or is your brain as empty as the tray you're carrying?" The waitress froze, her face going pale. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't." The slap came without warning. Isabella's hand cracked across the girl's face with a sound that echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. The waitress stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock and pain. Everyone stopped. The technicians, the photographers, the other servers. Everyone froze as if the air itself had turned to ice. "Watch where you're going next time," Isabella said coolly, examining her manicured nails as if she had just brushed dust from her dress. Then she turned back to the camera. "From the top, and someone get this girl out of my sight." Nobody moved to help the waitress. Nobody said a word. Alara's blood boiled beneath her skin. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to step forward, wanted to say something, wanted to tell this woman in her blood-red dress that money didn't give her the right to treat people like garbage. But her feet stayed rooted to the floor. She thought of her mother, of Tommy's empty inhaler, of Lily and the loan sharks circling like vultures. She thought of the $500 she couldn't afford to lose. So she said nothing, did nothing. Just like everyone else. The waitress stood there for a moment longer, one hand pressed to her reddening cheek, tears threatening to fall but not quite daring to. Then she lowered her head and walked away, disappearing into the service corridor without a sound. And Alara recognized the look in that girl's eyes. It was the look of someone who knew she had no right to be angry, no right to fight back, no right to feel anything except gratitude for being allowed to exist in the same room as people like Isabella Ashford. It was the look Alara saw in the mirror every single day. Alara tried to push the image of the slapped waitress from her mind as she returned to her duties. There was work to do, glasses to polish, napkins to fold, a job to keep. She couldn't afford to feel. Not tonight. She was moving toward the drink preparation area when she noticed Isabella stepping away from the photographer. The woman in red glanced around the ballroom once, a quick, careful sweep, then slipped through a side door that led to a small balcony overlooking the city. Alara thought nothing of it. Rich people did whatever they wanted. It wasn't her business. But fate had other plans. The service corridor that led to the kitchen passed directly behind that balcony, and as Alara walked through it, carrying an empty tray, she heard Isabella's voice drifting through the partially open window, low, secretive. Nothing like the imperious tone she had used in the ballroom. Alara knew she should keep walking. Every instinct told her to move, to pretend she hadn't heard anything, to stay invisible like Helena had commanded. But something in that voice made her slow down. "Is everything ready?" Isabella was saying, her words barely above a whisper but clear enough to hear in the quiet corridor. A pause. She was listening to someone on the other end. "Good. Tonight will end everything." Alara's feet stopped moving. "After tonight, it will all be ours. Everything he built, everything he controls. Ours." Another pause. Isabella laughed, a soft, cold sound like wind through a graveyard. "Don't worry about him. He doesn't suspect a thing. He trusts me completely. He thinks I love him." The contempt in her voice was unmistakable. Whoever she was talking about, whoever this he was, Isabella despised him. Just make sure everything goes according to plan. No mistakes. After the speech, when the moment comes, it will all be over. Alara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Isabella would hear it through the window. "I have to go. He'll be arriving soon. And I need to play the loving fiancé for a little longer." The call ended. Alara heard the click of heels approaching the door and forced herself to move. She walked quickly, not running. Running would draw attention until she was safely around the corner, pressing her back against the cold wall. A moment later, Isabella swept past the corridor entrance without glancing in her direction. The cold, calculating expression was gone, replaced by a radiant smile that could have fooled anyone except Alara, who had just heard what lay beneath that smile. She stood there, her pulse racing, her mind spinning. What had she just heard? "Tonight will end everything. He trusts me completely. After the speech, when the moment comes." Something was wrong. Something dark and dangerous lurked beneath those whispered words. The survival instinct that had been sharpened by years of living with an abusive stepfather, by years of navigating the treacherous waters of poverty, screamed at her that this was not normal. This was not a woman planning a surprise party for her fiancé. This was something else entirely. But what could Alara do about it? She was nobody, a temporary waitress who would disappear from this world after tonight as if she had never existed. The schemes of the rich and powerful had nothing to do with her. She had her own problems, her own family to save, her own debts to pay. This wasn't her concern. She shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. Not my business, she whispered to herself. Stay invisible, do the job, go home. But as she walked back toward the ballroom, Isabella's words echoed in her mind like a curse she couldn't shake. Tonight will end everything. Alara was still trying to shake Isabella's words from her mind when the atmosphere in the ballroom changed. There was no announcement, no trumpet fanfare, no dramatic entrance through the main doors. But she felt a shift in the air, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. The staff members who had been moving with practiced efficiency suddenly froze. Whispered conversations fell silent. Every gaze in the room turned toward the side entrance like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Alara turned her head, and for the first time in her life, she saw Dante Salvatore in the flesh. He entered through a side door, not the grand entrance like Isabella had used as if he didn't need anyone's attention to assert his presence, and he truly didn't. His presence alone was an irresistible force, like a black hole pulling all light toward itself without effort. He was taller than she had imagined, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a physique that spoke of controlled power, not the bulky muscles of a gym rat, but the lean, dangerous strength of a predator. His black suit was perfectly tailored, probably worth more than her entire year's wages, fitting his body like it had been sewn directly onto him. His hair was ink black, slicked back to reveal a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by an artist who understood that true beauty could be terrifying. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, lips pressed into a thin line that suggested he had forgotten how to smile years ago. But what Alara couldn't look away from were his eyes, gray, the color of the sky before a storm, of steel left out in the rain, of something cold and ancient and infinitely deep. They swept across the room in a single glance, seeing everything, missing nothing, as if he could read the secrets of every person present just by looking at them. And the scar, a faint line ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone, not long, but visible enough to tell a story of violence and survival. It didn't make him less handsome. If anything, it made him more dangerous. A silent warning that this was a man who had walked through hell and emerged with the fire still burning in his eyes. Walking just behind Dante was another man, large and solidly built, middle-aged, with the expressionless face of a statue. His eyes never stopped moving, scanning the room like radar searching for threats. Victor Russo. Alara remembered the name from whispered conversations among the staff. The boss's shadow, his most trusted bodyguard. They said he had been a mercenary before Dante's father saved his life, and that he had been loyal unto death ever since. The two men moved as one, Victor always positioned to shield Dante from any potential danger. Then Isabella appeared. The transformation was instant and absolute. The cold woman who had slapped a waitress minutes ago vanished completely, replaced by a vision of warmth and adoration. Her eyes sparkled, her smile radiated joy. She hurried across the ballroom, her crimson dress flowing behind her, and looped her arm through Dante's with practiced affection. "Darling," she murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I missed you so much." She pressed herself against his side, tilting her face up toward his with an expression of pure love. But Alara noticed what no one else seemed to see. Because no one else dared to look closely, Dante didn't return the embrace. His arm hung loosely at his side, neither pulling Isabella closer nor pushing her away. His body didn't lean toward her by even a millimeter. His jaw remained tight, his expression unchanged. And those gray eyes, those cold, storm-colored eyes, looked somewhere else entirely, as if his mind was very far away from this glittering ballroom and the beautiful woman clinging to his arm. There was no warmth between them, no connection, no love, just the cold distance of two strangers performing a dance that neither of them believed in. Ilara remembered the phone call she had overheard. "He trusts me completely. He thinks I love him." Looking at Dante's face now, at the emptiness in his eyes when he glanced at his fiancée, Alara wondered if Isabella had it wrong. Maybe he didn't trust her at all. Maybe he simply didn't care enough to doubt. Alara tried to push the image of Dante steadying the waitress out of her mind and refocus on her work. She had a job to do. She couldn't afford to be confused about a man who was still, by all accounts, one of the most dangerous people in the country. She moved toward the VIP table for one final inspection before the guests began arriving in full force. Helena's words echoed in her head, one mistake, and she was out. No payment, no second chance. She couldn't make mistakes. Not tonight. The VIP table stood on a raised platform at the head of the ballroom, elevated above the rest like a throne overlooking its subjects. The chairs were upholstered in black velvet, tall-backed and imposing, each one like a small throne for the kings and queens of the underworld. This was where Dante Salvatore would sit. This was where she would stand and serve, head bowed and silent, while the most powerful man in New York ate and laughed just a few steps away from her. She bent down to adjust a champagne glass that was slightly out of alignment, so absorbed in that small detail that she didn't notice the footsteps approaching behind her. When she straightened and turned, she collided with a wall. No, not a wall, a chest, solid and warm, wrapped in fabric that probably cost more than her entire life savings. The faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with something unmistakably masculine filled her senses. Something dark, something dangerous. Her heart stopped when she realized who she had just walked into. Dante Salvatore stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could have counted every stitch on the lapel of his suit if she had dared to look up, but she didn't dare. She dropped her gaze instantly, her heart pounding like a war drum, her hands gripping the hem of her uniform so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice trembling despite her desperate effort to control it. "I wasn't watching where I was going. Please forgive me." She waited for the anger, the shouting, the command to get out, just as Helena had warned. One mistake and she would disappear unpaid, unwanted, forgotten before she ever existed. She had made that mistake. Now everything was over, but the shouting never came. Instead, there was silence. Long, stretching silence that felt like centuries. Then a voice spoke low, steady, and touched with something she hadn't expected. Curiosity. "What's your name?" Alara froze. She wasn't sure she had heard correctly. The most feared mafia boss in New York was asking for her name, a temporary waitress who would vanish from this world after tonight, as if she had never existed. She swallowed, still unable to lift her head. "Alara Morgan. Alara," he repeated. The way he said her name made it sound different somehow, almost melodic, as if he were tasting each syllable carefully, turning it over on his tongue like something worth examining. "Alara Morgan." Then he said something she could never have anticipated, something that would carve itself into her memory and stay there forever. "Lift your head." She didn't react, certain she had misheard. "Lift your head," he repeated. His voice was still calm, but softer now, touched by something she couldn't name. "You don't owe anyone your gaze. Don't bow your head as if you're guilty of something." Slowly, as if her neck were rusted, and every centimeter required tremendous effort, Alara raised her head, and her eyes met his. Gray, storm-colored, deep as the ocean and just as unreadable. But he wasn't looking through her the way wealthy people always did, as if she were made of glass, as if she didn't exist at all. He was looking at her, truly seeing her, as a person, as a human being. There was no contempt in those eyes, no indifference, no cold dismissal she had learned to expect from everyone who had ever held power over her. There was only attention, pure, undivided attention, as if, in that single moment, she were the only person in the room worth looking at. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but to Alara, it felt like an entire lifetime. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever told her to lift her head instead of bowing it. Her whole life, she had been taught to lower her gaze, to make herself small, to remain invisible so that the powerful wouldn't notice her and decide to crush her beneath their feet. And now, the most powerful man in this city, the man everyone feared, had told her not to bow. Dante gave a small nod, as if completing some unspoken ritual only he understood. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Alara standing alone in the glittering ballroom with a heartbeat she couldn't name and a question burning in her chest. Was he a devil, or something else entirely? Or maybe, just maybe, he was both. The grand ballroom of the Obsidian Hotel came alive as the first guests began to arrive. Alara stood at her assigned position near the VIP table, a silver tray balanced in her hands, her face fixed in the professional, emotionless calm she had perfected through years of serving. But inside, her mind still lingered on the brief encounter with Dante, his words echoing like a melody she couldn't shake. She didn't owe anyone her gaze. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way he had. She gave a small shake of her head and forced herself to focus. This wasn't the time to dwell on meaningless thoughts. She was here to work, to earn money, to save her family, not to be unsettled by the gray eyes of a mafia boss. Guests filed in one by one, then in pairs, then in waves. Expensive suits that cost more than her annual rent, glittering evening gowns that swept across the marble floor like clouds of silk and diamonds, gold and jewels catching the light of the chandeliers, throwing sparks across the room like scattered stars. They laughed, shook hands, exchanged polite embraces with smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Ilara realized quickly that this wasn't merely a charity gala. This was a stage, a theater of power where the audience was also the performance. She spotted faces she guessed belonged to bosses of other families, men with the eyes of predators, women as beautiful and deadly as vipers coiled at their sides, politicians whose faces she recognized from television, stood shoulder to shoulder with people who probably owned those television stations. Deals were being made with glances and subtle nods. Alliances formed and broken with the raising of a champagne glass. And at the center of it all sat Dante Salvatore, silent and watchful on his throne of black velvet. Ilara moved around the VIP table like a shadow, pouring champagne with practiced precision. A glass for the gray-haired man who didn't acknowledge her existence. A glass for the woman dripping in emeralds who looked through her as if she were made of air. A glass for Isabella, who was laughing at something someone had said, her hand resting possessively on Dante's arm. She didn't spare Ilara a single glance. Then Ilara moved to the man seated on Dante's other side, Marcus Benedetti. She had heard Helena mention the name during the staff briefing, Dante's most trusted advisor. His right hand, the man who had served the Salvatore family for 15 years with unwavering loyalty. He appeared to be in his early 40s, his dark hair threaded with distinguished gray, his face carrying the refined handsomeness of a gentleman who had aged well. He wore his expensive suit with the ease of someone born into wealth, and when he spoke, his voice was smooth and cultured, but something in his eyes made Ilara's skin prickle, a cunning hidden beneath the trustworthy exterior, a hunger that didn't match his composed smile. As she poured champagne into his glass, she saw it, a flicker, quick as lightning, gone in an instant. Marcus's gaze darted toward Isabella just for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, Ilara saw everything. It wasn't the look of a loyal advisor glancing at his boss's fiancée. It was the look of a lover, heated, hungry, full of a desire that burned beneath the polished surface. Isabella's eyes met his for just a second, and something passed between them, an understanding, a secret, a promise. Ilara continued moving around the table, invisible as always, but her eyes missed nothing. The way Isabella's hand disappeared beneath the white silk tablecloth, the way Marcus shifted almost imperceptibly in her direction, the slight brush of fingers against fingers, hidden from everyone except a waitress who had learned to survive by watching. Then she saw it, a small slip of paper, folded tight, passing from Isabella's palm to Marcus's, beneath the cover of a reaching hand pretending to adjust a napkin. Ilara's stomach tightened. She wasn't foolish. She knew what she was seeing. Isabella Ashford, the beautiful fiancée of Dante Salvatore, was having an affair with his most trusted man. But there was something more, something darker. She remembered the phone call on the balcony, Isabella's whispered words. "Tonight will end everything. He trusts me completely." She watched the way Isabella and Marcus looked at each other now, not with the eyes of secret lovers stealing a forbidden moment, but with the eyes of conspirators waiting for something. Something was going to happen tonight. Ilara felt it in the air. In the tension, Isabella tried to mask behind her radiant smile, in the way Marcus kept checking his watch, as if counting down to a moment that only he and Isabella knew was coming. She told herself it wasn't her concern. She was just a waitress. She only needed to finish her job and go home, but the pieces were falling into place in her mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something terrible. Ilara's champagne tray was running low. She had been circling the VIP table for nearly an hour, refilling glasses, replacing empty bottles, watching the glittering guests laugh and drink and scheme behind their perfect smiles. Her feet ached, her back hurt, but she kept moving, kept working, kept being invisible. She needed to return to the preparation area for more champagne. She excused herself from the VIP section with a slight dip of her head, not that anyone noticed, and slipped through the crowd of guests with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to moving unseen. The grand ballroom was packed now. Laughter and conversation blended with the soft music from the orchestra in the corner, the scent of expensive perfume mixed with champagne, and the subtle undertone of power that seemed to permeate every inch of the Obsidian Hotel. Ilara headed toward a side corridor that led to the kitchen area, a quieter route where fewer people passed and the air was cooler, away from the suffocating heat of 300 bodies and 1,000 lies. The hallway was empty. Only the soft echo of her heels against the marble floor accompanied her steps. She was passing a small room, perhaps a storage closet or a staff break area, when she heard it. A voice. Low, controlled, familiar. Marcus Benedetti. Alara knew she should keep walking. Pretend she hadn't heard anything. Return to her work and forget whatever conversations the powerful had behind closed doors. But something in that voice made her stop. The same cunning she had glimpsed in his eyes earlier. The same hidden hunger that didn't match his polished exterior. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart beginning to pound. Her ear angled toward the door that was slightly ajar. "Is everything ready?" Marcus was asking. He was clearly on the phone, his voice low but perfectly audible in the silence of the corridor. A pause. He was listening to whoever was on the other end. "The glass has been marked correctly, yes? We need to be absolutely certain. No mistakes." Alara held her breath. "Just one glass," Marcus continued, his voice dropping even lower. "The one meant for him, only him." Her blood began to chill. Ricin, the word cut through the air like a blade. Colorless, odorless, undetectable. Alara's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. After the speech, Marcus said, his tone cold and calculating, as if he were discussing the weather rather than something far darker. "When he raises the glass for a toast, it will be over. Sudden heart failure, a tragedy among the elite. No one will suspect a thing." Ricin. Alara didn't know much about poison, but she knew enough. She had studied medicine once, in another life, before dreams crumbled and reality crushed everything beneath its weight. Ricin was deadly. A tiny amount could kill a healthy adult within days, and there was no antidote. The glass was marked. The glass meant for him. And she knew with a certainty that turned her stomach to ice exactly who him meant. There was only one man in this building referred to with that single pronoun, spoken with that mixture of fear and hatred. Dante Salvatore. "Isabella knows the plan?" Marcus asked, and Alara felt her insides twist violently. Isabella, the beautiful fiancée, sitting beside Dante at this very moment, her hand resting on his arm, her smile radiant and false. She was part of this. "Good," Marcus said, satisfaction dripping from his voice. "After he's dead, everything will belong to her, and she will belong to me. The Salvatore Empire will be ours." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of years of patience, years of pretending, years of waiting for this moment. 15 years. 15 years of playing the loyal servant. 15 years of bowing and scraping and watching him sit on a throne that should have been mine. Finally, it will all be worth it. Alara heard footsteps inside the room. Marcus was pacing, his excitement barely contained. She had to leave. Now. If he discovered she had heard this, she would die. She knew it with the same certainty that she knew the sun would rise tomorrow. These people were planning to murder the most powerful mafia boss in New York. They wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a nameless waitress who had stumbled onto their secret. She began to step backward, slowly, carefully, placing each foot with agonizing precision, terrified that the slightest sound would betray her presence. "Don't let Chef Roberto make any mistakes," Marcus said, his voice sharpening. "Remind him only the glass with the green mark. The green mark, nothing else. After tonight, he'll have enough money to disappear from this country forever. Chef Roberto." The name burned itself into Alara's memory. She kept retreating. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Her back touched the corner of the wall. She turned and walked, not running. Running would draw attention, forcing her legs to move at a normal pace, even though every cell in her body screamed at her to flee. When she finally reached the drink preparation area, she collapsed against the wall, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the counter to stay upright. What had she just heard? She had become a witness to an assassination plot. Marcus Benedetti, Dante's most trusted advisor, his right hand for 15 years, was planning to kill him, with the help of Isabella, the woman who would stand beside him at the altar, and a chef named Roberto would be the instrument of death, slipping ricin into a champagne glass marked with green, a glass that she, Alara Morgan, the VIP server, would be the one to place in Dante Salvatore's hand. She would be the unknowing tool of murder. If she hadn't overheard that phone call, she would have handed him poison with a smile and watched him die without ever knowing she had killed him. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and for the first time that night, Alara didn't know what to do. Alara forced herself to breathe. In, out, in, out. She pressed her back against the cold wall of the corridor, willing her racing heart to slow, commanding her trembling hands to be still. She had misheard. That was the only explanation. Marcus Benedetti was Dante Salvatore's most trusted advisor. 15 years of loyalty. 15 years of service. People didn't betray someone after 15 years, not like this. Not with poison and conspiracy and murder. She had been stressed, exhausted. Her mind was playing tricks on her because she hadn't eaten in 2 days and her mother was dying and the loan sharks were circling and everything in her life was falling apart. She had misheard. She had to have misheard. Alara pushed herself off the wall and walked toward the drink preparation area, her legs unsteady beneath her. She would get more champagne. She would return to the VIP table. She would finish her job, collect her $500, and go home to her family. That was all. The preparation area was a large room behind the main kitchen, lined with gleaming counters and rows of expensive champagne bottles arranged like soldiers awaiting deployment. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the bright lights, each one polished to perfection. A man in a chef's uniform stood with his back to her, doing something at one of the counters. His movements were quick, nervous, not the smooth efficiency of someone comfortable in their work. When he heard her footsteps and turned, Alara recognized him immediately. The name tag on his chest read, Roberto Costa, Chef Roberto, the name Marcus had mentioned on the phone. After tonight, he'll have enough money to disappear from this country forever. Roberto's face was tight with tension. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air circulating through the room. His eyes darted to Alara and widened just for a second, just a flash before he forced his expression into something resembling calm. "What do you need?" he asked. His voice was dry, guarded, the voice of a man with something to hide. "More champagne for the VIP section," Alara replied, forcing her own voice to remain steady. "Normal. Invisible." Roberto nodded and stepped aside, gesturing toward a tray that had already been prepared. Several champagne glasses stood filled and waiting, golden bubbles rising lazily toward the surface. "Take that one," he said. "It's ready." His eyes followed her as she approached the counter. They didn't leave her until she picked up the tray. Alara set the tray down and began her inspection, counting the glasses as she always did, checking for smudges or imperfections as Helena had instructed. It was routine, automatic, the kind of mindless task that let her pretend everything was normal. She lifted the first glass. Clean. The second. Perfect. The third. Her hand froze. There was something on the bottom of the glass. A small sticker, no larger than her fingertip, pressed against the base in a spot where no one would ever see it unless they deliberately turned the glass over and looked. Green. The sticker was green. Marcus's words thundered through her mind like a death knell. Only the glass with the green mark. The green mark. Nothing else. Alara's heart stopped. This was it. This was the glass. The glass containing ricin, colorless, odorless, undetectable. The glass that would cause sudden heart failure. The glass that would kill Dante Salvatore in front of 300 witnesses who would never suspect a thing. And she, Alara Morgan, the invisible waitress from the Bronx, was supposed to carry it to him. She was supposed to place it in his hand with a smile. She was supposed to watch him raise it to his lips. She was supposed to be the final link in this chain of murder. Her hands began to shake so violently that the glasses on the tray trembled, champagne rippling like water disturbed by a coming storm. She set the glass down quickly, afraid she might drop it, afraid she might shatter the evidence of a crime that hadn't yet been committed. Chef Roberto was watching her from across the room. His eyes were sharp, suspicious. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Alara forced her face into blankness, the mask of invisibility she had worn her entire life. "No," she said. "Nothing's wrong." She picked up the tray, the glass with the green mark sitting at its center like a viper coiled among flowers, and walked out of the preparation area. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her mind was screaming. She was carrying death in her hands, and she had no idea what to do with it. Alara stood in the corridor outside the preparation area, the tray heavy in her trembling hands. The noise of the gala filtered through the walls, laughter, music, the clink of glasses raised in celebration. 300 of the most powerful people in New York were enjoying themselves just a few steps away, oblivious to the death that waited in a champagne flute marked with green, and she was the one holding it. Her mind was a battlefield. Thoughts collided and shattered against each other like waves in a storm, each one pulling her in a different direction until she felt like she might drown. What should she do? Who could she tell? Who would believe her? A poor, nameless waitress from the Bronx accusing the most trusted advisor of the Salvatore family, a man who had served faithfully for 15 years of plotting murder? They would laugh in her face. Or worse, far worse, they would kill her to ensure her silence. Marcus had an entire network of power within this organization. He had spent 15 years building trust, cultivating loyalty, positioning himself for this moment. Who would take the word of a girl they had never seen before over the right hand who had proven himself 1,000 times? No one. Alara stared at the glass with the green mark, her reflection distorted in its crystal surface. She could stay silent. She could walk back into that ballroom, place this glass in front of Dante Salvatore as instructed, and step back into the shadows where she belonged. He would raise the toast. He would drink. He would die tonight or tomorrow, whenever the ricin finished its invisible work, and no one would ever know she had known. No one would ever connect a temporary waitress to the tragic death of a mafia boss. She would collect her $500. She would go home. She would buy medicine for her mother and food for her siblings, and maybe, just maybe, survive another month. Her family would be safe. She would be safe. It was the easy choice, the smart choice, the choice that anyone in her position would make. Alara thought of her mother, lying on that damp mattress, coughing blood into a stained cloth, thought of the medication she couldn't afford, the treatments that were slipping further out of reach with every passing day. She thought of Lily, sweet, silent Lily with her trusting eyes and her hands that spoke in signs because her voice never could. The loan sharks had threatened her. 14 days. If Alara didn't find the money, they would come for her sister. She thought of Tommy, wheezing in the darkness, his inhaler empty, his lungs fighting for every breath. They needed her. They depended on her. If she threw away this job, if she drew attention to herself, if she made enemies of people who could erase her existence with a single phone call, who would take care of them, who would protect them when she was gone? The weight of her family pressed down on her chest like a stone, crushing the air from her lungs. But then she thought of Dante, the monster, the Mafia king, the man whose name made grown men tremble. He might be a killer. He probably was a killer. He had built an empire on blood and fear and the broken bones of his enemies. But he was also the man who had caught a stumbling waitress without expecting thanks. The man who had looked into Alara's eyes, truly looked, truly seen, and told her not to bow her head. You don't owe anyone your gaze. In a room full of people who treated her like furniture, like air, like nothing, he had treated her like a human being. Did he deserve to die? Maybe. Maybe he had done things that justified 100 deaths. But not like this. Not through betrayal. Not at the hands of the man he trusted most. Not murdered by his own fiancé's conspiracy. No one deserves to die because of betrayal, Alara whispered to herself, the words barely audible even in the quiet corridor. She looked down at her hands. These hands had worked endlessly to support her family. They had held her mother through nights of unbearable pain. They had learned sign language to speak to a sister who lived in silence. They had soothed a little brother's fears when the world seemed too dark to bear. These hands had never hurt anyone, but if she carried this glass to Dante Salvatore, they would become the hands of a killer. Even if she hadn't poisoned it, even if she hadn't known the full truth, she would still be the final link in this chain of murder. The last person to touch the weapon before it found its target. Could she live with that? Could she look into her mother's eyes, into Lily's eyes, into Tommy's eyes, and pretend to be the person they believed her to be while carrying the secret of a man's death on her conscience? Could she teach Lily that honesty mattered, that doing the right thing mattered, while knowing she had chosen silence to save herself? No. The answer rose up from somewhere deep inside her, from a place that poverty hadn't touched, that desperation hadn't corrupted, that years of suffering hadn't managed to destroy. No, she would not be that person. She would not become someone she couldn't recognize in the mirror. I'm not a murderer, she said quietly, her voice steadier now. I won't become one. Not tonight. Not ever. Alara looked at the glass with the green mark one last time. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have power or connections or anything except her own 2 hands and a conscience that refused to stay silent. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let Dante Salvatore die. Not like this. Not because of her. Whatever it cost her. The music stopped. The chandeliers dimmed, their golden light fading to a soft glow that cast the ballroom in shadows. A single spotlight blazed to life, cutting through the darkness like a blade of white fire, illuminating the stage at the front of the room. 300 guests fell silent, 300 faces turned toward the light, and Dante Salvatore walked into it. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never known doubt, his black suit absorbing the spotlight like a void against the brightness. He didn't rush, he didn't hesitate, he simply walked, and the world waited for him. Alara stood at her position near the VIP table, the champagne tray balanced in her hands. The glass with the green mark sat at its center, golden bubbles rising innocently toward the surface. A ticking bomb disguised as celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, Dante began, his deep voice carrying through the ballroom without effort. I want to thank you all for being here tonight, not only to support the Salvatore Foundation, but to support the children we are trying to help. His gray eyes swept across the crowd, seeing everything, acknowledging everyone, commanding attention without demanding it. This year, we have awarded full scholarships to more than 250 students from low-income families. Alara's chest tightened. 250 students. 250 children who had been given the chance she never had. 250 children who now have an opportunity to go to school, an opportunity to dream, an opportunity to become whatever they want to be. She thought of the applications still hidden under her mattress at home, the essays she had poured her heart into, the hope that had died the week her mother collapsed and she had to choose between her future and her family. There had been no choice. Not really. Family always came first, but standing here now, listening to Dante speak about giving dreams to children who had none, the old wound ached in a way she hadn't expected. That is why we are here tonight, Dante continued, his voice warming. Not for prestige, not for photographs, but for those children, for their futures, for the belief that no one should be denied a chance simply because they were born without privilege. Alara watched him beneath the spotlight, the light crowning him like a halo, and she thought, this is the man they want to kill. A man who funded scholarships for poor children. A man who might be a monster in other ways, but who was doing this one good thing, this one undeniably good thing, who had the right to take that away. And now, Dante said, his tone shifting to something lighter, I invite all of you to raise a glass with me, to the future of the children we are helping, and to your generosity tonight. He stepped down from the stage to polite applause. The moment had come. Alara moved toward the VIP table, her legs heavy, her heart pounding. She set the tray down and began distributing glasses with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. One glass for the gray-haired man, one glass for the woman in emeralds, one glass for Isabella, who took it without looking at her, her red lips curved in anticipation, one glass for Marcus, whose fingers tightened around the stem as he watched Dante approach, and finally the glass with the green mark. Alara placed it directly in front of Dante's seat, exactly as she had been instructed. Dante returned to the table and picked up the glass. The champagne caught the light, shimmering gold, beautiful and deadly. To the future, he said, raising the glass toward the crowd. To the future. 300 voices echoed back. A forest of crystal lifted high. Isabella smiled, her eyes bright with something that looked like joy but was really anticipation. The anticipation of a widow about to inherit an empire. Marcus's hand clenched beneath the table, his jaw tight, his body coiled like a spring waiting to release. Dante brought the glass toward his lips. Alara watched, frozen. 3 seconds. She had 3 seconds. 3 seconds to stay silent and survive. 3 seconds to let a man die and walk away clean. 3 seconds to choose between her family's safety and a stranger's life. 1 second. Her mother's face flashed through her mind. 2 seconds. Lily's trusting eyes. Tommy's labored breathing. 3 seconds. Dante's words, don't bow your head as if you're guilty. And Alara made her choice. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She didn't weigh the consequences or consider the odds. She simply moved. Her body lunged forward before her mind could stop it. And before anyone in that glittering ballroom could understand what was happening, before Dante's lips could touch the rim of that poisoned glass, Alara Morgan drove her fist straight into his face. The punch was hard enough to send pain shooting through her knuckles, but it did what she needed it to do. The champagne glass flew from Dante's hand, spinning through the air in a graceful arc, catching the light one final time before it shattered against the black marble floor. Crystal exploded across the stone like scattered stars. Golden liquid spread across the polished surface, and silence, absolute, deafening silence, swallowed the room whole. 1 second, 2 seconds. The entire ballroom froze as if caught in a spell. 300 guests stood motionless, champagne glasses suspended in midair, mouths open in silent shock. The orchestra's instruments hung limp in their hands. Even the chandeliers seemed to stop swaying, their crystals holding their breath. No one moved. No one breathed. No one could process what they had just witnessed. A waitress, a nobody, a nameless servant had just punched the most powerful mafia boss in New York in the face. In front of everyone, Alara stood there, her fist still raised, her knuckles throbbing with pain. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes burning into her skin. She could feel the weight of what she had done pressing down on her shoulders like a mountain. But she didn't regret it. Dante stumbled back a step, his hand flying to his jaw where her fist had connected. His gray eyes found hers not angry, not yet, just shocked, confused, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. For a single heartbeat, their eyes met, and then hell broke loose. Assassin! The scream tore through the silence like a knife through silk. She's an assassin! She tried to kill him. Alara didn't see who shouted. It didn't matter. The The words were a spark thrown into a room full of gunpowder. Security guards surged from every direction like wolves descending on wounded prey. Black suits, earpieces, guns drawn from concealed holsters, metal glinting beneath the chandelier light. Ilara tried to step back, to explain, to say something, anything, but there was no time. A body slammed into her from behind. She hit the marble floor with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs, her cheek scraping against the cold stone, her arms wrenched behind her back with brutal efficiency. Someone drove a knee into her spine. Someone else grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. Pain exploded through her body in a dozen places at once. "Don't move," a voice bellowed in her ear. "Don't you fucking move." She couldn't have moved even if she wanted to. There were at least 3 men on top of her, pinning her to the floor like she was a rabid animal that needed to be contained. Above the chaos, she heard Isabella's voice shrill, hysterical, cutting through the noise like a siren. She tried to kill Nicholas. I saw it. She tried to kill him. Kill her. Kill her now. The beautiful fiancée in her blood-red dress was standing on her chair, pointing at Ilara with a manicured finger, her face twisted into a mask of righteous fury. But Ilara saw the truth beneath that mask. Relief. Isabella's eyes were bright with relief, with triumph barely concealed. The waitress who had nearly ruined everything was about to disappear, and no one would ever know the truth. Then Marcus's voice cut through the chaos, cold, controlled, the voice of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Everyone, please remain calm." He stepped forward, adjusting his cuffs as if this were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "The situation is under control. Security has apprehended the attacker." He walked toward Ilara, his polished shoes stopping inches from her face. She could see her own reflection in the shine, bruised, bleeding, broken. "Take her to the basement," Marcus said, his voice soft but carrying clearly to the guards. "I'll handle the interrogation personally." No. No, no, no. If they took her to the basement, she would never come out alive. Marcus would make sure of that. He would torture her until she told him everything she knew, and then he would kill her and dispose of her body where no one would ever find it. She had to make them understand. She had to make anyone listen. Ilara gathered every ounce of strength left in her battered body and screamed, "The glass was poisoned!" Her voice tore through the ballroom, raw and desperate. "Check the glass! There's a green sticker on the bottom. It's poison. Ricin. Check it. Please." For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in Dante's eyes. A question. A hesitation. But then hands were dragging her across the floor, the marble scraping her skin, her head striking table legs as they hauled her toward the service entrance. "The glass!" she screamed again. "Check the green mark. I'm not lying. Please." No one listened, or no one wanted to. The last thing she saw before the elevator doors slammed shut was Marcus Benedetti's face. His lips curved into a small, satisfied smile, and Isabella, still standing on her chair, watching Ilara disappear with eyes that glittered like ice. The doors closed. Darkness swallowed her, and Ilara knew, with terrible certainty, that she was about to die. The basement was freezing. Cold seeped through the concrete walls like water through a cracked dam, settling into Ilara's bones until she couldn't tell where the chill ended and her body began. The room was small and windowless, lit only by a single bare bulb that hung from the ceiling, casting a dull yellow glow that made everything look sick and dying. Including her, they had thrown her into a metal chair bolted to the floor and cuffed her hands behind her back. The steel bit into her wrists, cold and merciless, already rubbing the skin raw. Her face throbbed where it had been scraped against the marble. Her ribs ached where someone had kicked her during the chaos. Blood filled her mouth from a split lip she didn't remember getting. But she didn't cry. She had learned not to cry a long time ago. From the nights when her stepfather came home drunk and took his rage out on her mother. From the days of hunger so sharp her stomach cramped while she still smiled at Lily and Tommy so they wouldn't be afraid. From years of swallowing tears because tears didn't pay bills, didn't buy medicine, didn't keep her family alive. Tears were a weakness she couldn't afford. Not then, not now, not ever. The door opened. Marcus Benedetti walked in, followed by 2 guards built like walls of muscle. Their faces were blank, expressionless, the faces of men who had done terrible things so many times that it no longer registered as anything unusual. Marcus removed his suit jacket with careful, deliberate movements, draping it over a chair in the corner, as if he were preparing for a business meeting rather than an interrogation. Then he rolled up the sleeves of his pristine white dress shirt, one cuff at a time, exposing forearms that were surprisingly strong beneath the polished exterior. The yellow light carved harsh shadows across his face, stripping away the cultured charm, revealing something predatory underneath. He pulled another chair close and sat down facing Alara. So near she could smell his cologne, expensive, sophisticated, completely at odds with the violence that lurked in his eyes. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving across her bruised face like a collector examining a broken piece of merchandise. Then he spoke, his voice soft and almost gentle. "Who sent you?" Alara met his eyes. "No one." "Who sent you?" he repeated, as if she hadn't answered. "No one. I'm just a waitress." Marcus nodded slowly, thoughtfully, as if considering her response with genuine interest. Then, without warning, he slapped her across the face. The blow snapped her head to the side, pain exploding through her cheek, stars bursting across her vision. The taste of blood deepened in her mouth, iron and copper flooding her tongue. "Don't play games with me," Marcus said, his tone still mild, still pleasant, as if they were discussing the weather rather than torture. "Who do you work for? Colombo family? Someone from Chicago? Who sent you to ruin my quai?" He stopped himself, correcting course smoothly. "Who sent you to attack Mr. Salvatore?" "No one sent me," Alara said, forcing the words through swollen lips. "The champagne glass was poisoned. You need to check it. There's a green sticker." Another slap. Harder this time. Her vision blurred, her ears ringing. "Poison." Marcus laughed. A cold, hollow sound that echoed off the concrete walls. A poor waitress from the Bronx suddenly knows about poisons and assassination plots. How fascinating. He stood and began to circle her like a predator stalking wounded prey, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the cold floor. "I'll ask you one last time," he said, stopping behind her, his breath hot against her ear. "Who sent you?" Alara closed her eyes. She thought of her mother, of Lily, of Tommy, of all the promises she would never be able to keep. Then she opened her eyes and made a choice. "I heard you," she said, her voice hoarse but steady, on the phone, in the hallway. "I heard everything." Marcus went still. "Ricin, the glass with the green mark. Chef Roberto, you said it would look like sudden heart failure. You said after Dante dies, the empire would be yours. You and Isabella." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. 15 years of pretending to be loyal, Alara continued, her eyes fixed on the wall in front of her because she couldn't see his face but could feel his rage building like a storm. 15 years waiting for this moment. "I heard every word." Marcus moved so fast she didn't see him coming. He grabbed her hair and yanked her head back, forcing her to look up at him. His face was inches from hers, twisted with fury, all traces of sophistication gone. "You heard?" he snarled. "You heard? Everything." He hit her again, and again, and again. Each blow was harder than the last, his control shattering with every strike. Alara's head snapped back and forth like a broken doll, blood streaming from her nose, from her lips, painting her face in shades of red. But she didn't beg, she didn't cry, she didn't plead. She just stared at him with eyes that refused to break, and that seemed to drive him beyond madness. "Who do you think you are?" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking. "You think you can destroy everything I've built? You're nobody. You're nothing. I'll kill you. And tomorrow no one will even remember you existed." He pulled a gun from his holster, black, sleek, deadly. The click of the safety being released echoed through the room like a death sentence. Alara looked at the barrel, pointed at her head. She thought of her mother's smile, of Lily's hands moving through the air like birds, of Tommy's laughter when she tickled him. She didn't regret what she had done. She had tried to save a man from being murdered by people who were supposed to love him. Even if she died here, she would die with her conscience clean. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "Any last words?" he hissed. Alara met his eyes one final time. "The truth will come out, and you will pay." Marcus's face twisted with rage, his hand steadied. His finger began to squeeze crash. The door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. And standing in the doorway, his gray eyes burning with a cold fury that made the temperature drop 10 degrees, was Dante Salvatore. Dante stood in the doorway like a statue carved from shadow and stone. His gray eyes swept across the room in a single second, taking in everything: Alara's bruised and bloodied face, the tears in her uniform, the defiance that still burned in her eyes despite everything. Then his gaze shifted to Marcus, who stood frozen with the gun still raised, his finger hovering over the trigger. Victor Russo appeared behind Dante, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip, ready to move at the slightest signal. Marcus lowered the gun immediately, his expression shifting from rage to something carefully controlled. "Boss," he said, his voice sliding back into professional smoothness, as if he hadn't just been seconds away from committing murder. I was interrogating the attacker. She refuses to reveal who sent her. Dante didn't respond. He stepped into the room, each footfall heavy against the cold concrete. He stopped directly between Marcus and Alara, his back to her, his eyes fixed on the man who had served him for 15 years. Leave. One word, spoken quietly, but it carried a weight that allowed no argument. Boss, she's dangerous. Let me leave. Now. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, fear, perhaps, or the realization that his carefully constructed world was beginning to crack. But he bowed his head, holstered his weapon, and walked out of the room, his shoulders rigid with tension. The guards followed. The door clicked shut behind them. Dante turned to face Alara. He pulled the chair Marcus had used and placed it in front of her, then sat down, his hands resting on his knees. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, studying her battered face, the blood drying on her lips, the steel in her eyes that refused to bend. You punched me, he said finally. Not a question. A statement. In front of 300 people, you punched the most powerful mafia boss in New York. Alara met his gaze. Yes. Why? Because you were about to die. Silence. Dante's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of doubt. Explain. So Alara did. She told him everything, the phone call she had overheard in the hallway. Marcus's voice describing the plan, recent, colorless and odorless, slipped into a champagne glass marked with green, the toast that would end with sudden heart failure. Isabella's involvement, her whispered words on the balcony about tonight ending everything. She told him about Chef Roberto, sweating and nervous in the preparation area, about the small green sticker she had found on the bottom of the glass, about her realization that she was meant to be the unknowing instrument of his murder. When she finished, the room was silent. Dante's face remained unreadable, his gray eyes fixed on hers as if searching for lies, for deception, for any crack in her story. Why? He asked again, his voice softer now, barely above a whisper. Why risk everything for someone like me? You don't know me. I could be a monster. I could have killed people. Why save a man like that? Alara was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Because no one deserves to die through betrayal, she said finally. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, being murdered by the people who are supposed to love you, that's not justice. That's not karma. That's just cruelty. She paused, then added, her voice dropping. And because you were the first person who ever told me not to bow my head, the first person who looked at me like I was human, in that whole room full of powerful people, you were the only one who saw me. Something cracked in Dante's expression just for a moment, just a hairline fracture in the ice. Then he stood, pulled out his phone, and turned away. Victor, he said, his voice hard and cold. Collect every fragment of the champagne glass from the ballroom floor. Every piece. Especially anything with a green sticker on the bottom. Send it to the lab. I want results within 2 hours. He ended the call and looked back at Alara. If you're lying, he said slowly, I will bury you myself. And if I'm telling the truth? Dante studied her for a long moment. Then I owe you my life. He walked out without another word, leaving Alara alone in the cold basement with nothing but hope fragile, desperate hope that the truth would be enough to save her. 2 hours later, Dante returned. In his hand was a folder. His face was still unreadable, but there was something different in his eyes now, something dangerous. He sat down across from her and opened the folder. Ricin, he said, his voice flat. The champagne glass contained ricin, a dose strong enough to kill a healthy adult within 24 hours. The symptoms would mimic sudden heart failure. Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. You told the truth. Dante turned to the next page. We checked the security cameras. The hotel has cameras everywhere, including the drink preparation area and the hallway. He looked up at her. The footage shows Chef Roberto setting aside a single champagne glass with a green sticker, and 30 minutes before that, the hallway cameras recorded Marcus Benedetti entering a storage room and making a phone call. He closed the folder. You said you didn't see his face, but the cameras did. Alara nodded slowly. She had protected herself by claiming ignorance, but the truth had found its own way out. What happens now? She asked. Dante stood. Marcus Benedetti will answer for his betrayal. In my world, there is only one punishment for treachery. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. And Isabella? Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She will be returned to her father with evidence of her conspiracy. Frank Ashford is a proud man. He will not tolerate his daughter bringing shame upon his family. He moved toward the door, then paused. 1 week. he said without turning around. In 1 week, Isabella Ashford will no longer be a problem. 1 week later, the news reported that Isabella Ashford had died in a car accident on the outskirts of Chicago. No one believed it was an accident. But no one asked questions either. In this world, justice wore many faces, and sometimes it came from the very people you called family. When the handcuffs were removed and the basement door opened, Alara expected to be escorted out of the Obsidian Hotel and told never to return. Instead, Dante Salvatore stood waiting for her in the corridor. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request, but somehow, it didn't feel like a command either. He led her to his private office on the top floor, a room of dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline. The city stretched out below them like a carpet of stars, beautiful and indifferent to the struggles of the people who lived in its shadows. Dante poured 2 glasses of whiskey and set one in front of her. "I owe you a debt," he said, his gray eyes fixed on hers. "You saved my life. In my world, that debt must be repaid. Name your price. Money, a house, your enemies eliminated. Whatever you want, it's yours." Alara looked at the glass, then at the man who ruled an empire built on blood and power, and she shook her head. "I didn't save you because I wanted something in return," she said quietly. "I saved you because it was the right thing to do. I don't need your money. I just need the wages I was promised for tonight so I can buy medicine for my mother." Dante stared at her for a long moment. "You're the strangest person I've ever met," he said finally. "You had the chance to ask for anything from a mafia boss, and all you want is $500. I don't want anything I didn't earn." Something shifted in Dante's expression, respect, perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper. "Very well," he said. "You'll have your wages." Alara went home that night with $500 in her pocket and bruises that would take weeks to heal. But she didn't know that her life had already begun to change. 3 days later, the loan sharks who had threatened Lily appeared at her door, not to collect, but to apologize. They bowed their heads and said the debt had been paid in full. Then they left and never returned. A week after that, the hospital called. Someone had paid her mother's medical bills, all $89,000, and arranged for the best oncologist in New York to oversee Grace's treatment. The specialized medication arrived at their apartment the same day, delivered by a private courier. 2 weeks later, Lily was accepted into the finest school for deaf children in the city, full scholarship, all expenses covered. And the landlord who had threatened to evict them? He sold the building. The new owner didn't ask for rent. Not once. Alara knew who was behind it all. She went to the Obsidian Hotel, demanded to see Dante, and confronted him in his office. "I told you I didn't want charity," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and something she couldn't name. Dante looked up from his desk, unfazed. "It's not charity. It's repaying a debt. I said I didn't want, you said you didn't want anything you didn't earn." He stood and walked toward her, stopping close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. "You earned this, Alara. You earned it the moment you chose to save a stranger's life instead of protecting yourself." She didn't know what to say. "I'm offering you a job," Dante continued. "Personal assistant. You'll work directly with me. The salary is enough to take care of your family for the rest of their lives." "Why me?" "Because you're the only person who's ever done something for me without wanting something in return. In my world, that makes you either a fool or the most valuable person I've ever met." He paused. "I'm betting on the latter." Alara wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to walk away from this man and his dangerous world, but she thought of her mother, of Lily, of Tommy, and she said yes. 6 months passed. Alara learned to navigate Dante's world, the meetings with dangerous men, the coded conversations, the constant threat of violence that hung in the air like smoke. She learned that he was ruthless with his enemies but fiercely protective of his people. She learned that beneath the ice in his eyes was a loneliness so profound it made her heart ache. And she learned that her mother's time was running out. The cancer had spread too far, too fast. Even the best doctors couldn't stop it. They could only make Grace comfortable as her body slowly surrendered. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Grace Morgan passed away in her sleep, peaceful, painless, surrounded by her children. Alara held her mother's hand as she took her last breath, and something inside her shattered. She didn't cry at the funeral. She didn't cry when they lowered the casket into the ground. She held Lily's hand and kept Tommy close and stayed strong because that was what she had always done. But that night, alone in the empty apartment that still smelled like her mother's perfume, the tears finally came. She cried for the woman who had sacrificed everything for her children. She cried for the years of suffering, the unfulfilled dreams, the life that had been stolen one piece at a time. She cried until her chest ached, and her eyes burned, and there was nothing left inside her but emptiness. And then she heard a knock at the door. Dante stood in the hallway, still wearing his suit from some meeting she had forgotten about. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer empty condolences or meaningless platitudes. He simply opened his arms, and Alara, who had never let anyone see her break, who had carried the weight of the world alone since she was 19 years old, collapsed into his embrace and sobbed against his chest. He held her through the night. He didn't speak. He didn't try to fix anything. He just held her, his hand stroking her hair, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "You're not alone," he whispered into the darkness. Never again. 1 year later, Alara stood in the office of the Salvatore Foundation, looking out over Manhattan glowing in the afternoon sun. She was no longer an assistant. Dante had entrusted her with running the Foundation's scholarship program, a position created specifically for her. "You see what others don't," he had said when he offered her the role. "You understand what poor children need because you were one of them. Find students like you, talented but without opportunity, and give them the door you never had." And she did exactly that. Over the past year, she had interviewed hundreds of students, read thousands of applications, and given opportunities to more than 300 children from struggling families. Every time she saw a child's eyes light up upon hearing they'd received a scholarship, she remembered the faded forms she had once hidden beneath a mattress, and she knew she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. Lily was thriving, 17 years old now, top of her class, surrounded by friends who had learned sign language just to talk to her. Tommy's asthma was under control. He dreamed of becoming a doctor someday, and Alara had promised him she would make sure he got there. They lived in a warm house with a small garden, where Alara planted roses in memory of her mother. That evening, Dante took her to the rooftop of the Salvatore Foundation building. A small garden bloomed beneath the sunset, roses and lilies, her mother's favorite flowers. Candles flickered in the gentle breeze. A table for two was set with wine and silver, Manhattan spreading below them like an ocean of light. Alara looked at him in surprise. "What's all this?" Dante led her to the railing overlooking the city, then turned to face her. His gray eyes were softer than she had ever seen them. "1 year ago," he began, his deep voice steady in the still air, "you punched me in the face in front of 300 people. Alara laughed, remembering that reckless, desperate moment that had changed everything. "It was the most painful punch I've ever taken," Dante continued, "but it was also the punch that saved my life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. "You gave me a chance to live, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live." He dropped to one knee, and Alara's breath caught in her throat. When he opened the box, a diamond ring sparkled in the candlelight, simple, elegant, perfect. "You taught me that there's still goodness in this world," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "that there are still people willing to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. You taught me how to trust again, how to love again." He looked up at her, and for the first time, Alara saw tears glistening in those storm-gray eyes. "Alara Morgan, will you marry me?" She stood there, tears streaming down her own cheeks, but they were tears of joy, the kind she had never believed she would be allowed to cry. She looked at the man kneeling before her, the man the city called a devil, the man who had become her angel, and she knew her answer. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with happiness. "Yes, I will." Dante rose, slid the ring onto her finger, and kissed her there in the rooftop garden with all of New York City as their witness. And that is how an invisible girl from the Bronx found the one person who truly saw her. That is how a man called a devil found a reason to become human. That is how a love born from darkness came to shine brighter than any light in the city that never sleeps. This story teaches us that sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing to do. But if we have the courage to act according to our conscience, life will find a way to reward us. Alara had nothing but honesty and courage, and those were the very things that changed her entire life. She didn't beg, she didn't plead, she didn't sell her dignity, even in her darkest moments. And when opportunity came disguised as danger, she seized it with her own hands. The greatest lesson of this story is simple but profound. No matter how poor you are, no matter how much the world looks down upon you, you still have the right to choose who you become. And that choice, not money, not status, not circumstance, is what truly defines you. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. If this story touched your heart, please give us a like and share this video with someone you love so they too can hear a meaningful story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our daily stories. We would love to know how this story made you feel. Have you ever faced a difficult choice between safety and doing the right thing? Have you ever met someone who changed your life the way Dante changed Alara's? Please share your thoughts and stories in the comments below, because we truly want to hear the voices that come from deep within your hearts. Every story deserves to be told, and every voice deserves to be heard. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in your heart each day. No matter how hard life gets, always remember after the rain, the sky will clear. And sometimes, miracles come from the places we least expect. Thank you once again for being part of our community. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.